Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Wednesday, October the 29th, and the government has just announced that the Ethiopian sex offender accidentally released from custody last week has been deported and arrived back in Ethiopia in the early hours of this morning. Hadush Kabatu sparked national outrage after being convicted last month of assaulting a 14-year-old girl and a woman in Epping while living in an asylum hotel. Footage of him boarding the plane will be on your TV sets all day long. The government will breathe a sigh of relief about that. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And my name is Sam Coates from Sky News. Welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne, the podcast that gives you everything you need for the day ahead in British politics in 20 minutes. The Home Office made this announcement just before 6 a.m. after shrouding the involuntary removal in secrecy just in case of a last-minute legal challenge. Now, Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy, whose department accidentally lost Kibatu on Friday, has publicly thanked Shabana Mahmood's Home Office, whose department oversaw the successful deportation. I have to say, Anne, it's all a bit unusual. For my money, you don't get many cabinet ministers publicly thanking each other. And that's particularly interesting because I am aware of tension between those two figures this autumn.
And Shabana Mahmood has tweeted her anger for releasing Kibatu in the first place. Well, who's that directed at, Sam, to an extent, the whole system, operations, prison, etc. But also it does hit the Justice Department. It's fascinating to see cabinet figures expressing their feelings in public like this. Another day where Mahmood went front and centre of the headlines, more visible on these occasions, it feels, than her predecessor, Yvette Cooper. That may also be a small amount of tension there between the big players. We saw footage overnight of the Home Secretary on the streets of Streatham alongside the police hunting down people working illegally as part of a drive this autumn to crack down on those pull factors, encouraging migrants to seek a life in the UK. But there's no hiding the fact that the government knows it has not solved what to do about illegal migration, and it needs to focus on it and show some successes.
The Home Office wants to point out today that the arrests of migrants working illegally in the UK have hit their highest level since records began over the last year, after the government intensified enforcement visits, focusing on takeaway shops, fast food drivers, beauty salons and car washes. You saw Shabana Mahmood on the street with drivers from various delivery firms pulled over by the police. Immigration enforcement officers made just over 11,000 visits relating to illegal working practices in the 12 months to September, the most recorded since comparable data was first collected in 2011. And that led to just over 8,000 illegal migrants being arrested, 63% more than last year. And of those, over 1,000 have been deported from the UK. Now, what's interesting as well is that this in many ways is Yvette Cooper's success. The window that this data was collected in had her as Home Secretary for much of it. But they know they need to go further. So I think before the end of the year, you're going to get a couple of things that go much further than Cooper did from Mahmood. One is a big new crackdown on visas. There'll be decisions on things like how long you have to wait in the UK before you get indefinite leave to remain. And I am told that most of the Boris wave will now have to wait 10 years. There'll be some exceptions for people from Hong Kong and people who contribute a lot to society, but mostly people who arrived after 2020 will have to spend 10 years before getting indefinite leave to remain. So a mini scoop there. Also, the idea is to just generally make Britain less attractive than comparable European countries. So we'll see how she gets to do that in the next 6 to 8 weeks.
That's a pretty fierce competition at the moment, I must say, when we look at the draconian policies that I've just been looking at. France and Germany. Italy already is pretty tough. Can you win that particular race to be less appealing than your neighbours to certain sorts of incomers? Anyway, all of this is likely to come up at Prime Minister's Questions at noon. The first after a pretty torrid week for the Prime Minister on the domestic front, at least. Something else that might rear its head is the fatal stabbing of a dog walker in West London. So concerned were officials last night about claims circulating there on social media that they have sent out biographical detail about an Afghan man being questioned by the police. They say he snuck into Britain on a lorry back in 2020 and was then granted asylum and indefinite leave to remain. But he wasn't living at Home Office accommodation. I think they're very keen to underline that this is not an asylum hotel issue. Now, my Playbook colleagues this morning drawing parallels of fears that the incident could trigger the sort of unrest on the right we saw over the summer, because that killing is likely to have a very emotional response. And we're seeing Stephen Yaxley Lennon, aka Tommy Robinson, very active there to his 1.7 million followers on the topic.
And these issues so tricky. Let's see how Keir Starmer handles them at midday. Let's broaden out a little bit, Anne, I think, to wider political challenges for the Prime Minister. I want to get your view on a little bit of news that broke overnight. Author and Sunday Times journalist Gabriel Pogrund revealed on their State of It podcast last night that there is a new key figure at the heart of the Labour campaign. Spencer Livermore, Lord Livermore, currently a Treasury Minister, will now run next May's Scottish, Welsh and local elections in England. Lord Livermore, who I know is not a household name, has been quite influential, helping Rachel Reeves with successive budgets, if that is a badge of honour to recommend him to the wider world. He used to be a Gordon Brown aide when Mr. Brown was in number 10. He was Ed Miliband's campaign director in 2015, a campaign that ended in a historic election defeat after a campaign beset by dreadful internal infighting. Nevertheless, he's the guy. Recognition Morgan McSweeney couldn't do that job as Chief of Staff as well. And what do you make of it?
Oh, the man who's always there. I mean, it takes us back into the Old Testament of Labour, doesn't it? Right from 1997 through the successful New Labour campaigns after that, 2001, 2005, was very active. Definitely a Brownite then. The fundaments of the Reeves project often seem to reach back to that when you look at the personnel and the connections between the key players. So he's been financial secretary to the Treasury from the Lords in a more behind the scenes role. This will plunge him right into the heart of what the government clearly sees, Sam, as a referendum on its performance and on Starmer and Reeves in their jobs. No doubts about that. A couple of thoughts. Livermore very much backs the kind of distributional argument you were referring to, Sam, yesterday when you were talking about targeting any taxes above a certain income threshold and doing very strong prep on that. So you can make the argument that people are overall much lower on the distribution of income than a lot of people think, than a lot of the media reflect. And therefore you can win, in inverted commas, even on an unpopular tax raising measures if you're seen to spare people who come in below a certain threshold. And calculating that is actually a lot more difficult than we might think because of marginal tax and other factors. Now, the Tories used to have a good argument against that, saying, well, where does that leave aspiration? Lots of people who are on a certain amount of money have a strong aspiration to make more, or they think they might in the future. That is a harder one to carry off now, just because a lot of people feel that their income is stuck or even declining a bit. So it'll be interesting what kind of tactics Livermore brings to this fight. As you say, he had that bruising outing with the Ed Miliband, but it shows, doesn't it, Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer there going back to the veterans, going back to the guys who've been on that bench for a long time when it comes to campaign phrase.
Right, you brought up the subject of the budget in the context of Spencer Livermore, so let's dwell on that for a large part of the remainder of this podcast. Rachel Reeves has been out and about in The Guardian writing about having to make necessary choices and the need to be candid. This is part of a pitch rolling to prepare the public for 30 odd billion pounds of tax rises that are coming on November the 26th. I have a theory, Anne, that the public has no idea. The normal people have no idea what's going to hit them in under a month. I don't think the general public know that this is coming. I am not even sure that this government has a particular democratic mandate for what it's about to do, because it's about to hit people in certain sections of society hard. And people might ask, why didn't you tell us in the manifesto? Why didn't you warn us more loudly until this point? What do you make of Rachel Reeves' pitch rolling and what she said in The Guardian this morning?
I think you're right about that in terms of the framing of a kind of conversation that Rachel Reeves is now beginning to have here in this Guardian article. We often talk about pitch rolling, don't we, about budgets, as if you simply decided what you're going to do in your budget and then gradually you put in a trail of breadcrumbs, the media pick it up, and we have a discussion about whether it's the right thing to do. By the time the budget comes, you're going, oh, well, I knew that was going to happen anyway. This feels different. It's a very up and at it tone from Rachel Reeves. I am determined we don't simply accept the forecasts, but we defy them, as we already have this year, she says. Well, up to a point, Lord Copper or Lady Copper, because some forecasts still have been looking pretty bad for the government and they haven't been able to defy them. But that is the tone. Now, she then says the following, and I'll be really interested what you make of this, reading the runes of Reeve speak as well as you do. She says, to do so means taking the necessary choices today, including the budget next month. Now, usually when you say we're going to defy the forecast, you're effectively saying we've got the numbers, we've got the stats, it's going a bit better than many people believe. Forecasts can be wrong. Things can just turn out more benign. That's one argument. Or you can actually say we're going to defy the forecasts by changing basically our tax and spend plans so that the forecasts turn out a whole lot better soon down the line. But that implies something very radical, and perhaps those tax shifts that you seem to be suggesting, if I understood you rightly, could break the manifesto pledge. So is that what we're really on track for here when we clear all of the huffing and puffing and defiance out of the way?
Look, I think that we are still quite possibly on track for a breach of the Labour manifesto. And I think that Rachel Reeves is signalling that. I had quite a lot of conversations yesterday about this business of defying the forecasts. My understanding of what it means is that forecasts are things that are drawn up based on past information about the future, but it is always optimal if you can do better than what they predict. And the Treasury will try and make an argument that already they've done a bit better than some of the previous forecasts. So good luck to them. I think that's what she's referring to with that. So, and yesterday, I tried to take you through why the numbers were so incredibly big and get to a £30 billion black hole, maybe higher than that, fairly straightforwardly. And having talked to officials and all the rest of it, nobody really challenges the overall premise. Probably less than 39 billion, but still a decent amount. So I've been talking to a range of people, sources, experts, economists. So today, I'm going to try and work out how you fill the black hole. I'm going to give you a whole load of stuff with a lot of help from the Resolution Foundation. Now, that's run by a brilliant economist called Ruth Curtis, who was in the Treasury. She knows exactly what she is doing. She's also got her finger on a pulse of politics as well as policy. This isn't her list. It's we thrashed out and had a conversation about various bits of intel that we had. So let me tell you how I/we thought you could get to 30 billion, just to give people a sense of what we're talking about. We don't think we've predicted everything, but it gives you the budget, a possible version of the budget in the round. Right. First of all, you can knock 5 billion off the headline total with a little trick. Rachel Reeves has said that she is going to cut spending, but the Treasury also say they're not going to touch the spending review, which takes and set budgets up to 28-29. Now, there's a very little techie get-out-of-jail-free card. They haven't allocated spending in 2029-30, that budget year, the year that matters for the fiscal rules. So you could lop a small amount off the headline figure, the indicative figure that they've already got, and call it an imaginary future spending cut that doesn't have real consequences, but could just make the sums add up. So that's your first 5 billion of the 30. The Resolution Foundation thinks you're probably quite likely to freeze the personal allowance on income tax, which will get you 7-8-9 billion. Those reforms to limited liability partnerships, hitting lawyers and GPs, basically making them pay national insurance, that will give you 2 billion. Now, remember yesterday I told you they were protecting the lower 2/3 of all earners. Well, if you raise taxes on the higher rate of earners, that gives you basically 1 billion, not a huge amount, but it gives you 1 billion. If you raise taxes on gambling companies, that's 1 to 2 billion. There's talk of what one person might call a mansion tax, possibly a higher rate council tax ban. That could give you 2 billion. Corporation tax loopholes, which is changing the rules for people when they die and when they leave the country, that's 4 billion. Right. So those are the ideas that are sort of largely floated around in the papers. But that still only gives you 19 billion, and you probably need to get closer to 25 to 30. So do you need to do something massive involving one of the big taxes and go near an area that's really tricky? Well, the Resolution Foundation have sort of put forward a sort of a slightly alternative course. They've got a clever idea that they think can satisfy the needs of what the Treasury needs to say with raising yet more money. They say put up income tax, but then reduce national insurance by the corresponding amount. And the reason is that income tax is levied on some people and national insurance is levied on a slightly different group. And what that means in practice is that if you raise income tax and reduce national insurance by the corresponding amount, the amount that employees, working people pay doesn't change, but the self-employed pay more because they don't pay national insurance. Pensioners pay more. If you're a landlord, you pay more because you pay income tax, not national insurance and rental. You do all of those things. You could raise about 6-7 billion and you're basically there at your kind of 28, 29, 30 billion pound black hole. But that would mean an absolutely explicit breach of the manifesto as well. That's the only way that you get to sums on this scale. I keep asking people, am I missing something? Are we really talking about all of this stuff? Nobody in government will confirm individual measures. So I could be completely wrong, but these are the sorts of things that you need to do to raise these incredible eye-watering sums. That's why I'd say I don't think the public is prepared for what's about to hit them, particularly people earning over about £50,000 a year.
I love the Sam Coates just a minute or just a couple of minutes guide to the budget. Bookmark it, people. Can I give you a few responses to that, Sam? And this is not just hearing it off the top of my head from the way you've run through it. It's a very clear account of how you could get there. I mean, there's one other, if you like, more benign scenario, isn't there, which I think is mentioned in a rather good piece in the FT today, which is that either the government is willing to take the kind of actions that you described. There may not be all of them, but that Ruth Curtis laid out to you, but many of them, or the fiscal position is not quite as bad as predicted, in which case that number comes in a bit lower and you don't have to do all of those measures. Affect some people who are going to be quite upset and vocal about it. The FT is referring to the higher inflation that the OBR was expecting, and that would actually lift GDP in cash terms, even if the real terms gains are very dubious, and that could actually help the sums of the Chancellor to an extent. As it happens, I think all of these things, well, this could, if you look at it this way and if you look at it that way, before the budget, tend to have a hard landing. Once the budget has been issued, because I think you can, I don't want to say you can fool some people some of the time, but people see things in the round, don't they? So on that last point, say tax and NI, I mean, we've seen that attempt to separate off, well, we're not really raising tax, we're raising national insurance and it only hits a certain group of people. That would be a very kind of Gordon Brown Labour way of going about it. But the fact is, a lot of people do conflate these things and they will simply see it as tax rises. If the government can make that argument that it's not really a tax rise because it's national insurance contributions, well, good luck to them. But that's not always or often the way it lands. On the LLPs, those limited partnerships, lawyers and GPs, as I understood it, I thought they were looking for ways which that wouldn't massively affect GPs as much, because you could also see, if you're trying at the same time, to amp up support for the National Health Service. You've got a problem there if GPs are in a very bad mood with you, but you could certainly make that argument that they are advantaged. And I think absolutely in terms of freezing thresholds, it seems that is very likely our old friend fiscal drag is back to stay. What else are you thinking about the budget?
I think that the government is not yet prepared for a backlash to a budget if it focuses, say, 20 billion, 15 billion, 20, 25 billion of tax rises on 1/3 of the population. I think that what I've experienced over 20 years is that it is never the amount that is raised or the number of people that do it that determines what causes the political fuss. in a budget, it is always slightly random and you can never predict it. Some things just psychologically hit when it comes to tax more than others. And if you are training so many of your different measures on people with existing property, slightly higher salaries, often they're some of the most vocal. That also captures newspaper editors and the people who are opinion formers and make points. So is the government prepared for the kind of backlash I would anticipate if the budget looked anything like that? Well, as yet, I'm not sure. Simply putting articles in The Guardian like that, talking in code about forecasts, does anything like what you need to do if you're about to do that in a month, given that it wasn't in your manifesto, you said that it wouldn't happen, and you're in a bit of a fight for your kind of political life at the moment in the polls.
There is a question, though, of what does the opposition to that look like? Because I think you're absolutely correct to say that. There's an emotion. I think we've touched it in different ways in the podcast this morning, that there's an emotional impact of a budget, or there's talking points that just leap the shark and everybody's talking about them. And it is the slight challenge to that sort of Resolution Foundation way of looking at things, the graphs and charts, the distribution, the smart sort of analysis of who's going to be affected. But, this is in the end about how people who shouts the loudest, what the tone is. Does it align with what people thought the government was going to do when it came into power? If it doesn't, are you then just looking like you're inconsistent in some way? Or worst case for Labour, that you've kind of gone back to what you always wanted to do, was raise taxes, that sort of attack. However, I can see that this is testing for the Conservatives and also for reform, because that group that you're talking about, vocal, well-heeled, kind of aspirational, or see themselves or are seen as a model for aspirational Britain. I mean, how well are they represented at the moment by the Conservatives, let alone by Reform, who seem to be training their economic firepower is quite disparate at the moment. So I agree with you, but as well as newspaper editors and mouthy columnists, sort of guilty as charged, some other people have got to make the argument of what the government has got wrong here. Yeah, there will be a backlash, but who benefits from it?
Right. I think that has more than crashed over our budget and our allotted time. So let's draw it to a close there. Thank you very much indeed. Let's see how it all plays out at Prime Minister's Questions. As I've long said, I think the budget is the biggest political event this year, frankly. And so unashamedly, we'll probably be back talking about it tomorrow. So I'll see you then, Anne.